Well, there's more breaking news tonight. This on Capitol Hill. The House is giving President Trump what he wants, a mammoth funding bill that includes new money for his border wall and money to fund part of the government. CNN's Ryan Nobles has the latest from Capitol Hill. So, Ryan, this bill passed the House, but at the Senate, does he have the votes?
You know, Jim, it is very hard to find anybody on Capitol Hill who believes that the Senate will pass this, specifically with the margin necessary to pass this legislation. They'll likely need 60 votes to get it over the finish line. You know, Democratic leaders have been insistent that they have no interest in supporting any type of legislation, even if it means keeping the government open, if it includes funding for a border wall. And the $5.5 billion that was inserted into this bill by House Republicans about an hour ago is exactly what the Democrats are opposed to. And to be clear, Jim, there's also quite a few Republicans on the Senate side that are also uncomfortable with the way that this language was inserted into this bill at this stage of the game, after it seemed both the White House, the House, and the Senate leaders on both Republican and Democratic sides of the aisle had agreed to pass a clean continuing resolution that would keep the government open until February. So the big question now is, what happens next? And, you know, Jim, there are Republicans in the House who believe that this opens the door for Democrats and the White House to begin another conversation on border wall funding, but that doesn't seem to be based in any kind of reality. Democrats have said over and over again that that is a non-starter for them. They felt like they had a deal on the table, and the president turned his back on that deal. And so now a shutdown seems very likely as we are now approaching that midnight deadline on Friday night. Jim?
Christmas shutdown. Ryan Nobles, thanks very much. Joining me now, USA Today columnist and CNN political analyst Kirsten Powers, and two of our political commentators, former Trump campaign advisor Steve Cortez and former Republican Congressman Charlie Dent. Steve, simple question to you. Is this going to end well for the president?
Look, I think it will, because it's going to end well eventually for America. Now, there may be a lot of near-term consternation, and I don't want a government shutdown, and I do realize that it will bring pain to some people. But in my view, it is well worth the temporary problems of shutting down part of the government so that we can permanently shut down what is a porous border that is a massive threat to our national and economic security in this country. So I'm glad that the president said he won't sign this continuing resolution. I think the Senate abdicated its responsibility by simply punting it to February and saying we'll deal with this later because we want to get home early for Christmas. That's not leadership. So I think the president is showing leadership here and trying to force their hand.
But Charlie Dent, the part of the government that's going to shut down, it's going to be the Department of Homeland Security, some elements of law enforcement, health care, et cetera. I mean, these are not inconsequential parts of the government. Is that a price worth paying for the American people?
Absolutely not. Look, this is utterly reckless. We all know how this is going to play out. The House just sent a bill over the Senate. The votes aren't there in the Senate. The Senate will strip out that $5 billion. They're going to send it back to the House. And if the House doesn't pass it, this is going to shut down. There's absolutely no reason to do this. The president had a deal on border security and DACA, the Dreamers. He walked away from it. The president, like he said the other day, he is going to own this. You know, these members of Congress, they have a responsibility to govern. And this is an utter failure of leadership if in fact, we actually shut this thing down. And after a week like this, with Jim Mattis just announcing his resignation, and, you know, the Cohen and Flynn and the Syria pullout. I mean, this has just been an incredible week. I mean, in fact, it seems like they're in crisis over there. I mean, order. We need order and stability and discipline, not this disorder and dysfunction, constant chaos. This is just terrible for the country. And I think as center-right conservatives, people ought to stand up and say this. This is not conservatism. This nativism, protectionism, isolationism, and now a shutdown. This is just not in the interest of this country.
Kirsten, you heard Charlie Dent there. He laid out, events that seem a million years ago. General Flynn appearing before a court 48 hours ago. But I mean, the series of events this week, is this an administration in chaos to the point where it can't run this country?
Well, I think, yes, I think they've been in chaos for a while, but today was a particularly chaotic day. And I think that you even see the chaos now bleeding into the right, which we haven't typically seen in the past, where you have them now turning against the president, and I think feeding into the chaos a bit, because that's why he has walked back his earlier claims. I sat here last night saying, we shouldn't chide him or shame him for so-called caving, because he did the responsible thing in terms of avoiding a government shutdown and compromising on the wall. And then he gets attacked by Fox News and Ann Coulter, and he changes course and now is willing to shut down the government over Christmas. So, I don't see any other way to spin this other than chaos, especially when you add in the resignation of General Mattis, which was not just a resignation of somebody who's highly respected. It was a complete rebuke of his foreign policy. And I think that that's the thing that is just the most shocking about it.
So Steve Cortes, defend this for me. Jim Mattis, rather, enormously respected. It takes a lot for him to walk out of that door and rebuke the commander-in-chief. You had the president's national security advisor rebuked by a federal judge this week, contradicting the president's claims of FBI, forcing him to lie. You have the president now running into a government shutdown in the face of the reality that he just doesn't have the votes or the support for money in the wall. Defend the president's running of this country this week.
Sure. Well, those are very different issues. But if I could start with the last one,
they're all happening in the last 48 hours.
What we started with here, which is the wall.
They're all happening in the last 48 hours.
The pace of news in Trump world is frenetic. That is for sure. We could never rest in the news business. But regarding the wall,
it's not news. It's generated by the administration. It's decisions that this president has made.
When it comes to the wall, I think Kirsten's, by the way, exactly right. I think the president was waffling on this. Or waffling is probably too strong a word, but he was at least considering what was advertised as a compromise. And in my view, it was no compromise at all. The president got nothing. He got no funding for the wall. And he got to sign yet another gargantuan spending bill like he did during the omnibus. And he promised us that he wouldn't do it again. So those of us, his most fervent supporters, those of us from the 2016 movement, from the campaign, we were very, very worried about it. I said so last night on the air. I said, I can't imagine, for example, I've already pledged to work for his reelection in 2020. I can't imagine going to voters and trying to explain to them why we don't have a wall in 2020, why we came up short on that issue, because it was the foundational promise of his campaign, and we've had a Republican Congress still for a few more days. We have to do everything possible to try to get this done, not because it's a vanity project or just because he promised, but because it's right for the security of the American people. Walls work all over the world, particularly in Israel. I think that's the best example to look. A wall will work on our southern border. Our porous southern border is a national economic
I see you shaking your head. I want to give you both the response, but Charlie's been shaking his head throughout. Republican Congressman Charlie, respond, and then let's go right to Kirsten.
I served on the Homeland Security Committee. I have not heard one serious expert on border security say that we need a 2,000-mile wall. I've never heard anybody say that. What we do need is operational control of the border. I voted for the Secure Fence Act back in 2006 that allowed for 700 miles of vehicular and pedestrian barriers, detention beds, border patrol agents, technology on the border. Yeah, we have to do more. But simply, somebody please define wall to me. Is it just, it's a wall with steel slats, 2,000 miles? How long is this going to be? Everybody knows that this is not the best way to establish border security by itself. And so to go to the mattresses over this, in my view, is just simply insane. We have to get back to some measure of order and discipline and stability in this country. And it's got to start with the President of the United States. I mean, this anarchy has got to end. I mean, I feel like, there are a few inflection moments.
Charlie,
the travel
anarchy
ban
that has
week.
to end is the anarchy at the border.
One at a
where
time,
we have
let him finish his thought.
Thousands of people.
Oh, come on. It's like, I feel like this is a Charlottesville week, a Scaramucci week. This seems worse. I mean, the Trump Foundation just got shut down this week, in addition to all the other things we just mentioned. I mean, it just seems like they're in crisis and anarchy, over there.
That defines our border, and it has for many years. And unfortunately, we have thousands of people who the mainstream media promised us time and again would never get here. They got here, and they attacked our border.
Actually, the numbers are down, but Kirsten, please go ahead.
It's just completely disconnected from reality. There is not chaos. To the extent that there's any chaos happening, it's created by the president. And, him sending the military to the border to fight off so-called invaders, which are actually just desperate people trying to get to a safer country, is the chaos that we see. And so I think it was a campaign promise. It's a bumper sticker campaign promise. And he made a promise that Mexico was going to pay for it. Everybody knew that that was completely bogus. And that's how he got himself into this mess, is that Mexico's not paying for it. See, we don't talk about that. Mexico is supposed to be paying for this, right? Mexico was never going to pay for it. Now you guys are mad at the Congress for not funding it. I mean, Mexico was supposed to pay for it. So why is this Congress's fault?
Kirsten, Steve, Congressman Dan, these are issues we're going to be running with for some time. But thanks for all tonight for taking the hard questions.